Hi, my name is Amber. Welcome back to my channel, Books and Beaches. So this video is part of what is going to be kind of an end of the year series on my channel where I talk about all of the different stats, topics that kind of wrap up the end of the year. And so I thought I would start off by talking about my 5 worst books I read this year, but I always like to be a little bit positive, and I am going to wrap up by talking about my 5 most underrated books, in my opinion, that I read this year. So I never want to be too negative in a video, and this is always just my opinion. So if you enjoyed some of these books, please do not take it, personally or anything. It is all about my opinion. And I always say too, it all depends on when I read a book. I think we can take books differently, depending on what and when you read them. And so I am just picking, by no means are these books bad. They were just, out of all of the books that I've read this year, I think as of right now, I've read 77. By the end of the year, I may read around 80, 85, because we haven't hit Christmas break yet, and I am planning on doing a lot of reading over Christmas break. But these so far are the 5 worst books that I've read this year. But then obviously I'm going to tell you some of the ones that I think are just really underrated at this point. So let's jump in and get started. I'm going to have a lot more these different types of coming at you. I'm hoping to bring you the best books that I read this year, some of the top ones that I read that released in 2024, etc. So anyways, let's jump in. So these are in no specific order. I kind of just went through my list of books that I've read this year and pulled them basically in reverse reading order. So they're not in the first one I list is the worst book and the last one I list is number 5 or whatever. They're just in the order that I pulled them. So I had to go with Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. Now, I always say, take my memoir recommendations ratings with a grain of salt. It is so hard to rate memoirs, but this one I just didn't resonate with, and I think I ended up giving it a 2. It just wasn't a story that I felt was meant for me, which has something to do with the rating that I gave it. And it just wasn't a story I found myself connecting with at all. Even though I listened to it, it just wasn't a story for me. And so that's why it's ending up on this list. It is by no means a bad story. And so I hate bashing a memoir, because I'm not bashing the memoir. It just, out of all of the books I read this year, it was one that I really just didn't enjoy. And so that's why it's here. The next one is If I Tell by J.W. Lynn. And now I read this one on a recommendation from someone in my book club. And I won't lie, I just didn't enjoy it. And I think part of the reason why I didn't enjoy this book was I read so many thrillers that, to me, this one was kind of boring, and it just wasn't written well. Now, if you are new to thrillers, or new to mystery books, this one might not seem that bad, but we basically, as I look here, it says, "My name is Jenna, I'm 16 years old, and I think my dad is a serial killer." I would have thought this book was written by a 16-year-old. I saw inconsistencies in the writing. I could tell that I felt it needed a better editor. I hate saying that, but I'm just being critical. This is my honest opinion. And the writing just felt very juvenile to me. And I think I might have even put that in my review. I don't know. I guess I didn't. But it just, because I read so many thrillers, it just fell flat for me. And so that's why it ended up on this list. After that, one that I think I just previously talked about in my last video was Coyote, Lost and Found by Dan Gemeinhart. I loved the remarkable journey of Coyote Ugly. Oh my gosh. Wrong subject. The remarkable journey of Coyote Sunrise. And I was looking forward to this book because I was oh my gosh, if we get to be back in this world, I think even Sarah mentioned what lessons has she learned, what growth has she had, and this book felt so flat. And I think there were so many things that I questioned in this book, and we have Coyote and her dad, going off on a journey on the bus during COVID, and the whole premise itself felt so irresponsible to me. And so I just couldn't believe that we were writing this premise and doing all of these things during this time of the pandemic that we now have already lived through and known like all of the precautions and things. And so it felt super irresponsible for me. And then just the whole story, it felt like she learned nothing. And so it fell super flat after really, really loving the first one. So there's that. Number 4 was Things I Wish I Told My Mother by Susan Patterson. Now, I believe this is James Patterson's wife. I think she also paired up with someone else in this book, and now I can't remember who, but I'll have the cover linked here. This was about a woman who teams up with her mother to take a trip to Europe. Now, I can't remember what part of Europe. It's over here somewhere. But takes a trip to Europe with her mother, and it's about their journey together, and she meets somebody while she's over there, and there's a little bit of romance, and to me it was supposed to be this. I expected it to be this like big connection between her and her mom, but then there was also this romance involved, so I feel like that took it away for me. And I don't want to give too much away, just in case you are interested in reading it, but I don't know, for me, and it could have been the time that I picked it up, I didn't feel the connection from it that I wanted to, because when I hear the title, Things I Learned from My Mother, I just expected like these big life lessons, and to me, I didn't get that. Now, I believe this one has some really, really good reviews. If I go back in my Goodreads here, I want to say it does. Let me just see if I can find it. I want to say even my own mom rated it higher than I did. And of course, I'm not going to be able to find it in my list now, because why would I? When I really want to be able to find it. But it fell flat for me. And so, yeah, I can't find it right now, of course, but obviously I'll be able to link it for you. So it wasn't what I wanted out of it. And then my 5th book, out of the, quote unquote worst books that I read this year, was The Coworker by Frida McFadden. Now, I normally love books by Frida McFadden. I love how quick they are. I call them, those popcorn thrillers. I usually can consume them really quickly. And her twists usually get me. And it wasn't that made me dislike this book, because I actually think I still gave this one a 3. It wasn't that I rated it badly. A 3 is not a bad rating at all in my book. What drove me to put this book on my list was all of the turtles. And if you've read this book, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I could not stand how many turtles were in this book. And I know it is part of the quirk. It is part of this character's, personality, but it drove me absolutely insane. And I think I probably would have enjoyed this book more if there were less turtles. So there are other books by Frida that I've loved so much more because there wasn't this obsession with like one particular thing in the book. And I get it. It was part of the quirk. But I couldn't stand it. And I had to finish the book. With all Frida books, I want to finish it. I want to figure out what the twist is going to be, or the multiple twists, because a lot of times she'll have multiple twists, but I just couldn't stand the turtles. So there was that. I do have an honorable mention in here because some of my lowest rated titles on my Goodreads this year were actually the titles from the Improbable Meet Cute short stories that Amazon put out. I think it was around Valentine's Day. Most of those I rated like 1 or 2 stars. So I didn't want to include them as like full-length novels here, but they are definitely my honorable mentions because most of those I really, really disliked. So yeah, there's that. But let's flip this around and talk a little bit more positively before we sign off here and talk about my 5 most underrated books of the year. Now, the first one is probably the one that has the most ratings on Goodreads, but I feel like it is a book that I don't hear a lot of people talk about in like the BookTube, YouTube, Book Talk, space. And it could be because it is an older book. Now I'm trying to think of when it came out. It came out in 2020, and that was pre my time on YouTube. So that could be part of the problem, because a lot of the other books I read this year were like newer releases, 2023, 2024. But that's They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. I really, really liked this book. And I want to say I picked this one up on the recommendation of Audrey from Chapter and Converse. And this was phenomenal. This is about a professor. Like the first quote here on Goodreads, I think, says it all. It says, Scarlett Clark is an exceptional English professor, but she's even better at getting away with murder. Like, that's all I want to tell you. Like, this book was so good. Like, the dark academia piece is just like chef's kiss, so good. It was 5 stars, like so good. I just loved how, twisted and crazy this book was. And so, like I said, this one has the most ratings. I think this has like over 64,000 ratings on Goodreads. So out of this list I'm talking about, this one does have the most, but I don't hear enough people talk about it anymore. So maybe it was talked about back in 2020 and I just like wasn't a part of this space, but I had to mention it here. So my second book is actually a recommendation I got from Krista at Books and Jams. And this was The Lost Year by Catherine Marsh. Now, this book only has, like, at this time at least, 3,728 ratings on Goodreads, and it was phenomenal. Now, this is a middle grade book. I read it during middle grade March in like honor of reading like Krista. And it is toted, I'm just going to read it here because it's just easier. It's a survival story that traces the family's secret back to the Holodomor, a terrible famine that devastated the Soviet Ukraine in the 1930s. So we get multiple perspectives in this book, which I love. Each chapter kind of switches back and forth. So we're getting 2 different perspectives in like the 1930s. Yes, 2 different perspectives in the 1930s era, and then we're getting the perspective of a 13-year-old named Matthew in 2020, while he's connecting with what I believe is his great-grandmother. And it was just such a unique way to tell the stories of this 1930s Ukraine, which I believe it was more of a story that I had not learned a lot about before. And so I think, approaching it from a middle grade lens is a really great way to learn about something like that, because it's not so heavy. And like I said, it's just a historical fiction time period, that I don't know a lot about. So that one was phenomenal. 5 stars easily. Yeah, and it's very clearly underrated. So number 3 was Bodies to Die For, and this is by Lori Brand. This one only has 617 ratings on Goodreads, and 3 of those would be mine, Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library, and one of our subscribers, because we did a buddy read together of this, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars, but I definitely want to check out more that Lori Brand has to offer. I'm not sure if she's put anything out since, but this was like a multiple perspective fitness influencer versus like the body positivity movement, kind of like versus each other basically. And we got multiple perspectives. It was kind of and then there were none, but kind of sort of, because they were kind of killing off different fitness influencers, and there was some hacking going on. It was written really well, and I liked getting all of the different perspectives that we did. And so we all really enjoyed, buddy reading it together. We did a couple check-ins over Zoom, and I really liked Lori Brand's writing. So I think for only having 617 ratings at this point, it's definitely underrated, and I can't wait to see what else she comes out with. So there's that. Number 4 is a book that actually was just published this September. So I'm not shocked that the ratings are this low in numbers right now, but I have to mention it because I think it's going to be, it's underrated right now, but it should go up. And that is When We Flew Away by Alice Hoffman. This is a book that she came up with, what Anne Frank's life was like the year before they went into hiding. So the year that they were living in the Amsterdam area before, they went and hid in the attic. And this only has 2,742 ratings at this point. So like I said, this only came out in September. So, take that with a grain of salt. But it was such a unique perspective, and we get to see, what a spunky and interesting, child that Anne Frank might have been. And, Alice Hoffman is taking liberties with this, of course, and, taking into account the research that she did. And then it is a work of fiction, so there's that. But it was just enjoyable to read and kind of experience the growth that Anne had over that year and what she might have experienced living in Amsterdam at that time. So I think the ratings on this one will definitely go up, but I think at this point it still is underrated for a new release. So, and then the fifth and final one I have talked a little bit about already this year, but that is The Group Trip, and this is by Audrey Ingram, and this only has 511 ratings. This once again came out this year. I can't remember the specific month that it came out this year, so I do think those ratings will eventually go up. Let me just double check here. But let's see, this came out in August. So it's still pretty low for being out for almost, 5-ish months at this point. But this one is likened to Happy Place by Emily Henry. Now, I know, controversial. I've said that before, I'll say it again. But it's such a unique story about a group of friends that has taken a trip together every year since college. And you are getting the perspective of each of those trips, as well as the perspective of what's going on in current day and the current trip that they're on. And I love this group of friends. They're all very unique and all have, their own issues, and you're getting to see those issues that they're dealing with. And I think they're all very relevant. And so as someone in, their upper 30s with friends that are all dealing with different things, it's something I can definitely relate to. And I think anybody that, is at my age range and that has, a group of friends with all different, or is at different stages in life, I think this could be a really unique idea. So that is my fifth underrated book. So like I said, my 5, worst books of the year, and then my 5 most underrated books of the year. I had to kind of end that on a positive note. What are some of the worst and most underrated books that you read this year? Feel free to let us know in the comments below. As always, if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.